All right, in this video, I'm just going to read a post from my blog because I think it's conducive to doing that because there aren't a lot of pictures like a lot of the other posts have. So I don't know, I know myself, like there are times where I would rather just listen to something than have to sit down and read it. So figured I'd do that for this one because Um, the way it'll set up, you can just turn it into an MP3. I mean, I don't know. It's kind of weird to think that somebody would actually want to listen to this, but I don't know. I guess there's a few out there, just from some comments I've got. So let's get started. This is Homeostatic Equilibrium Part 1, Cybernetics and the New World Order from January 11th, 2016. Note, the phrases this intelligence and that which orchestrates our perception of this reality are used early and often throughout this post. There are no shortage of theories out there regarding who or what this entity is, so please insert your own views on this point whenever you see these phrases. My only intent is to acknowledge that whatever it is, it obviously exists. The public relations team for the Club of Rome described itself as a group of world citizens sharing a common concern for the future of humanity. Published in 1972 by the Club of Rome's Project on the Predicament of Mankind, The Limits to Growth featured the following well-known admission. The common enemy of humanity is man. In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. All these dangers are caused by human intervention, and it is only through changed attitudes and behavior that they can be overcome. The real enemy, then, is humanity itself. Now, far be it from a simple goyim like myself to question the intentions of the magnanimous world citizen philosophers of the Club of Rome. However, in my apparently unenlightened view, the message being relayed by the limits to growth was more truthfully explained to us via the Matrix. And this is a quote from Agent Smith. I'd like to share a revelation that I've had during my time here. It came to me when I tried to classify your species, and I realized that you're not actually mammals. Every mammal on this planet instinctively develops a natural equilibrium with the surrounding environment, but you humans do not. You move to an area and you multiply and multiply until every natural resource is consumed, and the only way you can survive is to spread to another area. There is another organism on this planet that follows the same pattern. Do you know what it is? A virus. Human beings are a disease, a cancer on this planet. You are a plague, and we are the cure. The foregoing musings contain some seriously disingenuous projection on the part of that which coordinates our perception of this reality, meaning this sentiment is a classic example of guilt by association, where the intelligence behind the virus of civilization blames its host victims for the destruction that it intentionally facilitates as a necessary precondition to its own survival and expansion. To suggest that there is something innate within the human spirit that created our current situation is absolutely ridiculous. While they were by no means free of violence or other atrocities, the system's own historians will be the first to tell you that the singular characteristic of pre-contact indigenous or savage cultures was to live in relative equilibrium with their habitat, due mainly to a belief that land is not a commodity which can be bought and sold, rather it exists for collective benefit and must be preserved for future generations. It is both difficult to fathom and laughable to contemplate the ridiculousness of this intelligence now deflecting our inevitable recognition of this hypocrisy by working a veneer of environmental sentiment into the externalization of its hierarchy via UN Agenda 21 and the Green advertising campaign. And of course, we have a picture of the Georgia Guidestones here with the last commandments, as it were. Be not a cancer on the earth. Leave room for nature. Leave room for nature. In other words, it is the virus of civilization that is spreading across the earth, perpetuating a chronic and otherwise unnatural state of dis-ease within the perception of the beings interacting with it. When faced with the preceding incontrovertible truth, many occult apologists will appeal to a more nuanced version of the projection blame game, namely the quote unquote hidden in plain sight version. According to this logic, the intelligence orchestrating our perception of this reality does not actually hide anything that it is doing from us. So, if the information is freely available and apathetic humans choose not to alter their behavior in response to it, then they are indeed to blame for their own suffering, or so this line of reasoning goes. While this intelligence should be congratulated for a clever advertising campaign, this argument is just more purposely disingenuous obfuscation in the context of a parasitic system that does everything it possibly can to distort the ability of its host to recognize truth. To illustrate this point, take for example the theoretical life path of a being born amnesiac within the confines of this system. Totally defenseless during its 9 months in the womb, the being absorbs emotionally, energetically, and physically everything that its likewise amnesiac mother absorbs and carries any resulting pre-existing trauma with it into this reality. The being is born within the sterile and traumatic environment of a hospital, quickly taken away from the mother within hours of its birth. The being is issued a birth certificate imprinted with the sole of its feet so that it may abdicate its true purpose in order to conduct itself in artificial commerce when it reaches the appropriate age. The being is dosed with toxic vaccines laced with myriad destructive substances and diseases. If the being is a boy, skin from its penis is cut off in a barbaric and traumatic ritual. And incidentally, if it is an Orthodox Jewish ceremony, the rabbi will suck the blood from the penis after it is cut. This place is crazy. Anyway, the being is fed a plethora of toxic foods and beverages that slowly erode its natural-born resonance with the earth. Depending on circumstances dictated by the economic position of its parents within this system of artificial scarcity, the being may or may not have access to the resources it requires and suffers accordingly, a cycle of poverty which often repeats itself generationally. Likewise, given the purposeful destruction of the family unit, the being may or may not have its two parents living in the same residence. In lieu of competent parental guidance, the being is slowly exposed to the destructive impact of the television, ruining its reasoning capabilities over time. The being is indoctrinated with some form of religion, thus ensuring that it will never be capable of understanding the correct way to perceive this reality. The being is eventually sent to school where it becomes indoctrinated with literally nothing that is true, setting it up for a lifetime of manipulation by the media. The being eventually obtains a cell phone and a computer, plugging itself into the electronic grid and further disconnecting it from the resonance of life. The being discovers pornography and its inherent perversion, losing all ability to truly connect with the opposite sex as naturally intended. And that is also part of the reason for the ritual of circumcision, to increase that level of disconnection between male and female. Like all those who came before it, the being starts to self-medicate accumulated trauma with various freely available toxic substances that further disconnect it from life. Regardless of the length of time spent in school, the being eventually acquires a slave job within this slave system because all beings have to accumulate the magic talisman known as money in order to live as a part of it. The being spends a lifetime solely focused on accumulating enough of these pieces of paper in a manner commensurate with its responsibilities, and the being is so run down as a result that it rarely has the energy to pursue any sort of worthwhile endeavor, if at this point it were even capable of determining anything worthwhile beyond the subconscious vampirism cloaked within the energetic rituals known as professional sports, media, and Hollywood. If the being ever does follow its muffled intuition and investigate anything worthwhile, there is already a gatekeeping network in place designed to discredit the legitimacy of conspiracy theories, promptly leading the being back. Let me read this over. If the being ever does follow its muffled intuition and investigate anything worthwhile, there is already a gatekeeping network in place designed to discredit the legitimacy of conspiracy theories, promptly leading the being to fake truths or outright jolting the being back into the consensus norm. Due to a lifetime of exposure to a toxic environment and allopathic medical system, the being eventually develops a multitude of chronic illnesses, often resulting in bankruptcy and early death. As the cycle of disconnection is passed from one generation to the next, more often than not, at the end of its life, the being is eventually discarded into a nursing home by its children. The being's physical body dies, and this intelligence uses all of the accumulated trauma against the being in order to make it feel responsible for the trail of associated regrets and beliefs, thus convincing the being to reincarnate and navigate its way through this maze of insanity all over again. Now, just a note here, obviously, I cannot say for certain, given my current level of awareness, whether or not reincarnation is an actual fact. However, looking into the cases that have studied children who remember their past lives, I think there's obviously something to it. Now, you can go onto fucking Oprah and see her interviewing a past life regressionist. His name is Dr. Weiss, I believe. So they are promoting this idea of reincarnation, right? But they're doing it for a very different reason. They would filter that realization into the Eastern philosophies that are very insidiously infiltrating Western thought, so that you would more easily believe their spin on it, which is, the spiritual university spin, right? Like, well, Earth is, you're here to learn, and you signed a contract or the metaphysical equivalent of that, and you agreed to be here and experience what you're experiencing to learn, right? So if you're, the child of an alcoholic who is beating the shit out of his family, well, you signed up for that to learn, right? So, and then that ties into the whole thing of like, well, you just have to do it over and over again until you finally learn your lesson and you ascend, right? You transcend the program at that point. And that is just absolutely ridiculous. So I'm not saying it in that sort of context. I'm bringing it up in light of the the possibility that this is happening and why it might be happening, right? And then you get into idea. I'm sure everybody's heard of ideas about like the Loosh farm, right? So I won't get into that now. Just I wanted to make it clear why I was bringing that up there. Moving on. More specifically, now take, for example, the daily routine of the being trapped within this system of civilization. First, since this intelligence has managed to artificially structuralize the natural daily cycle of sunrise-sunset into artificial mathematical units called seconds, minutes, and hours, the being is unnaturally jarred out of its sleep by an alarm clock, parentheses, and incidentally, the being's entire existence is governed by the fabricated construct of mechanical time and its artificial subsidiary, the calendar, end parentheses. The being then rushes to get ready for work, takes a shower in toxic water, and gets dressed in its appropriate societal uniform, a uniform which likewise characterizes its entire existence. And ironically enough, the men with the most important jobs wear a symbolic noose around their necks. The being then probably ingests some form of the neurotoxin caffeine, most likely in the form of its especially toxic drug known as coffee, thereafter probably making the mistake of breaking its fast with some toxic food at some point in the morning. Now, I know that there's a lot of coffee drinkers out there that will recoil in horror at that statement, but you got to ask yourself, there's a liquor store on every corner for the same reason that there's a Starbucks on every corner. Why is that? That's what you need to ask yourself. Because, it's funny whenever I see somebody bring this up, it's like, it's the comments below it will be a string of junkies trying to justify their habit. but since coffee is universally accepted, and there's hundreds of articles out there that will tell you how it's beneficial, right? But I'm not so sure about that, and I think you might want to check out the link I have here. Moving on. The being puts its shoes on and gets in its car, a vehicle powered by a fossil fuel, which it is forced to buy at any price. The being travels through the artificially zoned concrete jungles with the other primates, governed by a streetlight system which intentionally produces traffic jams to stress out the travelers. And on this point, they've done studies of ant farms and like ant colonies where the ants have their own traffic system where like the workers are bringing back food, to and from the hive, right? And they do it in the most amazingly ordered and civil way, right? So it's just another example of how this intelligence has constructed a system that necessarily makes us not cooperate with each other. And I mean, I know anybody who's been in a car in a city or suburban environment, like this is especially obvious when like a road goes down from 2 lanes to one, and you just see, instead of everybody just getting over when they see that, you just see lines of cars zooming in the right lane that's closed down to get up to the front and cut over, and then that's how the traffic jam starts, right? So and then you're sitting in your car getting furious with the drivers instead of with this insane system that constructed all of this in the first place. Um, it's just crazy stuff. So when the being completes its mind-numbing work, it travels home in the same fashion, by design at no point touching the grass or dirt with its bare feet to discharge accumulated toxic energies and bring it into equilibrium with the Earth's residents. Instead, the being goes right back into its box, takes its shoes off, and finds some artificial outlet to escape the drudgery of its daily routine before it starts all over again, distractions which there are certainly no shortage of. From booze, marijuana, sex, drugs, and food, to movies, television, news, books, video games, and the internet. So I'm sure everybody's in a good mood after listening to all of that. Oh man, let's move on. Obviously, the preceding analysis could have gone on for much longer and included many more horrific details. However, I think the point regarding the hidden in plain sight narrative has been sufficiently made. It is disingenuous at best and criminal at worst to suggest that any being somehow deserves this purposeful assault on its existence, and it is the height of absurdity to thereafter imply, in the context of an all-out and relatively covert war on their awareness, that the host beings themselves are somehow responsible for the depraved state of their existence, when by design they were never intended to be capable of discovering what had been hidden in plain sight in the first place. Worse yet, after many hard lessons, any sufficiently aware being will eventually come to the inescapable occlusion. Reading ahead there. Let me start that over. Worse yet, after many hard lessons, any sufficiently aware being will eventually come to the inescapable conclusion that the secret truths of the occult were just another layer of bullshit festering in this rotten onion known as civilization, pre-planned to be released by this intelligence during a certain window of mechanical time as a part of its larger agenda. While this collective state of affairs tends to induce rage, as it will become more clear as we delve into cybernetics and relate it to this system and its limits to growth, taking an adversarial approach against the quote-unquote New World Order is pointless, because to fight New World Order agents is to fight ghosts in the machine. In this connection, the intelligence orchestrating our perception of this reality has intentionally leaked information about the organization of its network of mercenaries as a necessary precondition to achieving its ultimate gambit, using the internet to strategically proliferate the mysterious rhetoric behind nebulous labels like the Illuminati and New World Order. On the simplest level, providing a controlled disclosure of the occult truth that the system has always been orchestrated by an infrastructure of secret societies and its mystery religion makes sense if you are going to phase out the industrial age of the constitutional nation state in favor of the singular fascist regulatory structure of the information age, as subconsciously this weakens resistance to the idea of the system dissolving the previously necessary delusion that its participants were entitled to freedom, self-determination, and individual rights. Moreover, in publicizing your mystery religion via its New Age spin, The younger generation set to inherit the updated version of your system can be indoctrinated into a bastardized version of oneness, such that they never think that they needed any of those individual rights to begin with. Those rights are like totally coming from the ego man, in parentheses. In any event, and speaking of things hidden in plain sight, the Declaration of Independence was very clear regarding your rights, insofar as the subsidiary corporation known as the United States of America was established for them, we the people, and their posterity, not for you and yours. While the system has always allowed you to obtain various licenses in order to legally operate within it, doctor, lawyer, driving, marriage, etc., those licenses require royalty payments to the issuing corporation and likewise come with a set of terms and conditions dictated by said corporation. Hence, for example, the income tax that must be paid as a royalty on the acceptance of the Federal Reserve note as payment for services rendered in commerce, or the quote-unquote constitutional allowance for quote-unquote freedom of speech in certain designated situations, so long as it does not fall within one of the many judicially precedented exceptions which nullify the application of this limited privilege inherent to the license known as quote-unquote U.S. citizen. And then we have a picture of the British East India Company, which is, of course, the American flag with the stars replaced by the British flag. Based on no legitimate authority whatsoever, in the 1606 Virginia Charter, the King of England granted his subjects a similar license to colonize America. The king accordingly declared the right and exercised the power to regulate every aspect of commerce in his new colony. One of the few guarantees included was the privilege of representation, a covenant which the king purposely did not fulfill as a part of this theater production, refusing to hear any of his colonial subjects' grievances. Let me just go real quick to this link and show you a form of censorship taking place. This is a link to A New History of America, and you can see, if you're watching the video, you can see that, I'll do it over so you can see what happens while I describe it. There's a copyright claim from SME who blocked it, and this is part 3 of 6, and you can see that it'll just skip part 3 because of that copyright claim, and then it goes straight to part 4. So these videos have been on the internet for a long time, like many years. This was uploaded March 23rd, 2011, right? And these are interviews that the Informer did with Visigoth, which you can find other places. I just think it's hilarious that SME, I mean, I'm sure they did it because of the matrix imagery that's at the beginning, that they would put this random copyright claim on, coincidentally, the one part that I linked in my post. Just absurd, and I wanted to point that out. So sorry to Window Ninja for getting one of your videos blocked. My bad. Anyway, savvy and corrupt aristocrats in their own right, the quote-unquote founding fathers thereafter had their pre-planned reason to initiate the groundswell, which culminated in the Declaration of Independence and Revolutionary War. As James Montgomery explains, the duplicity in the United States is still a British colony, and this is a quote from James Montgomery. The Revolutionary War was fought and concluded when Cornwallis surrendered to Washington at Yorktown. As Americans, we have been taught that we defeated the king and won our freedom. The next document I will use is the Treaty of 1783, which will totally contradict our having won the Revolutionary War. I want you to notice in the first paragraph that the king refers to himself as Prince of the Holy Roman Empire and of the United States. You know from this that the United States did not negotiate this treaty of peace in a position of strength and victory. Rather, it is obvious that Benjamin Franklin, John Jay, and John Adams negotiated a treaty of further granted privileges from the King of England. Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and John Jay, as you can read in the treaty, were all esquires and were the signers of this treaty and the only negotiators of the treaty. The representative of the king was David Hartley Esquire. And the link that's blocked is the informer going into the history of the Temple Bar, which has its Inns of Court. There's 4 of them. And he kind of details how many of these esquires were members of the Temple Bar and thus allegiant to the crown. And in contract law, you can't have interested parties, every party can't be from the same interest, which in this case, the treaty would have been signed by all of the crown's representatives, right? So it's null and void. Moving on. I wonder if this is still James Montgomery. I wonder if you have seen the main and obvious point. This treaty was signed in 1783. The war was over in 1781. If the United States defeated England, how is the king granting rights to America when we were now his equal in status? We supposedly defeated him in the Revolutionary War. So why would these supposed patriot Americans sign such a treaty when they knew that this would void any sovereignty gained by the Declaration of Independence and the Revolutionary War? If we had won the Revolutionary War, the king granting us our land would not be necessary. It would have been ours by his loss of the Revolutionary War. To not dictate the terms of a peace treaty in a position of strength after winning a war means the war was never won. And that's the end of the quote. You see, this intelligence laced the Constitution with a Trojan horse known as the Necessary and Proper Clause, a legislative and judicial device purposely designed to expand the scope of the federal government as the Industrial Revolution progressed and interstate commerce began to flourish in America. And for those of you who don't know, the Necessary and Proper Clause allows Congress to legislate against anything that can be categorized as interstate commerce. So you can imagine how the Industrial Revolution and the growth in commerce across state lines, and as America took form and the states even came into existence, you can see how that clause set into the Constitution from the beginning would be a Trojan horse that the federal Congress could eventually use to expand the scope of its power. And you can see that in real time now, how the states, they supposedly have the 10th Amendment, protecting everything that Congress doesn't legislate as their own purview to legislate. But interstate commerce has grown to the point where everything is regulated, and the states are dependent on the funding that comes from the federal government. So, they're not going to rock that boat. And, okay, let's see, where was I? So, and this is why I say Franklin's tongue was firmly in cheek when he supposedly said that the Constitution created a republic if the colonists could keep it. I mean, because it was never designed to be kept. It was always designed to play out like it's played out. So in this context, we can appropriately consider the ridiculous occult musings of charlatan Manly P. Hall in The Secret Destiny of America, wherein he discusses the imaginary Francis Bacon's The New Atlantis, referring to the continent of America as an area peculiarly set aside by nature, right, for the perfection of philosophy and the sciences. And this is a quote from Manly Hall. Bacon's secret society was set up in America before the middle of the 17th century. He made sure that the American colonists were thoroughly indoctrinated with the principles of religious tolerance, political democracy, and social equality. Through carefully appointed representatives, the machinery of democracy was set up at least 100 years before the period of the Revolutionary War. Bacon's secret society membership was not limited to England. It was most powerful in Germany, in France, and in the Netherlands, and most of the leaders of European thought were involved in the vast pattern of his purpose. The mystic empire of the wise had no national boundaries, and its citizenry was made up of men of good purpose in every land. The alchemists, Kabbalists, mystics, and Rosicrucians were the incisive instruments of Bacon's plan. And that's the end of the quote. The purpose of the illusory narrative distilled by the mystic empire of the wise was to establish an imperial vehicle, the United States of America, through which a singular culture and corporate regulatory structure could be seeded throughout the world under the guise of quote-unquote freedom and democracy. A systemic perceptual upgrade from the pre-existing relationship between serfs and their king. From an advertising campaign perspective, the public relations team for the British monarchy would have never been able to convince the world to willingly assimilate the necessary systemic programming like the former colony that supposedly won its freedom and thereafter saved the world from the evil Axis powers during World War II was able to. The genius of this narrative is that the same imperial vehicle can now play the role of the scapegoat as this intelligence formally consolidates its system into the United Nations infrastructure. Hence, the alternative media tasked with quote unquote exposing the evils of the US fronted West, from the 9/11 inside job to the machinations of the banksters to the creation of the imaginary terrorists known as Al Qaeda ISIS. And I mean, this explains the entire internet, the conspiracy theory, alternative media, truth movement, whatever you want to call it. It is all designed to completely, weaken the Western world, the United States, NATO, and its quote unquote allies. Because how can you, and this is especially true with the financial system and the way that that's been exposed, because, how can you convince people to adopt the blockchain and the idea of the digital currency known as Bitcoin and all of the similar derivatives out there without the selling point of, oh, well, it's decentralized and it will totally do away with the banks. It's Bitcoin is a whole nother subject. I won't get into that just now. So moving on. Naturally, the duplicity lurking within the hypnotic machinations of this intelligence began long before the dubious creation of the United States of America. Excuse me. According to this system's own historians, the birth of civilization coincided with the domestication of plants and animals, a process described as the agricultural revolution, circa 10,000 BC. And this is a quote from The Martian. The coolest one I got was from the University of Chicago, my alma mater. They say that once you've grown crops somewhere, you've officially colonized it. So technically, I colonized Mars. And just one interesting note is the Rockefellers are heavily behind the University of Chicago. And the University of Chicago is notorious for being a center of disinformation. And then below that, there's a picture of Matt Damon in The Martian and his little farm that he made in his space station. And below it is a quote: colonization is an ongoing process of control by which a central power dominates the surrounding land and its components. Historians thus mistakenly refer to the move from hunter-gatherers to stationary farmers as some sort of natural evolution of the human species. The truth is that agriculture was purposely introduced to us by this intelligence to begin the long process of disconnecting us from our natural state of being and otherwise innate desire to find equilibrium with our surrounding environment. And that's why, I just found that quote from The Martian to be so telling, is because, if you view that quote in this context from the perspective of a force outside of our own that is introducing agriculture to us, well, it's like, well, yeah, you're colonizing the land, right? And by extension, us, as we'll get into. In fact, they are now even openly admitting that human DNA underwent widespread changes because of agriculture, altering height, digestion, immune system, and skin color. In this connection, the domestication of wild plants also eventually led to the introduction of cultivars in response to the inevitable rise of pests and blights that tend to accrue on farmland, a trend which by design ignored the reality that such modified crossbreed strains are not native to this reality's ecosystem and are likely unfit for human consumption, or at the very least contain only a shadow of the resonant benefit inherent to their wild counterparts. And anybody who's ever worked on a farm can tell you that the way that it is done is, even if it's an organic farm that's small scale, that isn't a monocrop field, you know, the pests find the, because you see, it's all artificially placed together in a row, or however else that you set it up. And once the bugs find it, it's time to feast, as opposed to the wild counterparts, which would just be, you know um, placed in a larger ecosystem, and kind of spread out a little bit, to where the bugs aren't going to decimate the entire crop. And because that's where Monsanto came from, right? Is they have been continually trying to find a way to genetically alter the plants so that they have a natural, well, natural is definitely the wrong word in the context of Monsanto, but so they have a modification that will kill the pests. But of course, that whole process is no different than what the allopathic medical system is doing to our internal environment by overprescribing antibiotics. Is eventually the bugs just adapt, and they become more and more virulent and unable to kill. And these people that have been taking antibiotics their whole lives, it's only natural that their stomach is going to eventually just, they're not going to be able to process pathogens, and they're not going to be able to naturally heal themselves, and then they're caught in that cycle of pills. It's insanity. You know, and you can see that internal system mirrored in the external world when you artificially structuralize it with things that do not belong there. Let's see, where were we? The end result of such a trend is both logical and obvious. According to the United Nations FAO, by 1999, 75% of the world's food was generated from only 12 plants and 5 animal species. I mean, that's just crazy, right? That is a crazy stat. 12 plants. Now, of course, it's like the Brassica family of plants. They have many derivatives, so people wouldn't think that that's all one plant, right? That like broccoli and kale are from the same strain. And many, many others. And then, so below this, I have a picture of what botanist George Beadle did, where he created a copy of an early domesticated corn, like what he thought it might have looked like, by crossing a wild grass with Argentine popcorn. And I mean, usually the wild grass is just totally different from the ear of corn that we're consuming. Just wild stuff. Designed to eventually make us more receptive to their system of subconscious alchemy, the introduction of agriculture was one of the many first steps in the process of this intelligence domesticating human beings, taming the body's naturally designed wild ability to infuse the awareness occupying it with true knowledge from creation itself. And this is just a quote from Wikipedia. Domestication is the cultivating or taming of a population of organisms in order to accentuate traits that are desirable to the cultivator or tamer. And tell me if this next part doesn't describe the state of the human race. Domesticated organisms may become dependent on the cultivator, since they sometimes lose their ability to survive in the wild. And then this is returning to the post. Domestication and eugenics are from the same family of thought. Thus, it should not be surprising to learn that in the process of describing the supposed interplay between natural and artificial selection, intelligence frontman Charles Darwin was the first to outline the connection between evolution and domestication in the genetics of plants and animals. Francis Galton, Darwin's half-cousin, would later coin the term eugenics to describe his attempt to apply Darwin's theories to human beings. Without falling into the trap of discussing the prefabricated talking points within the intelligence constructs of science and religion, the salient disclosure regarding these characters is made in an interview with Gregory Bateson and Margaret Mead. And this is an interview with Stuart Brand, who is, he runs in the same circles as like Daniel Pinchbeck and that whole psychedelic strain of thought. So this is Stuart Brand. So you had some notion that all of these various pathologies were structurally the same. Gregory Bateson. No, structurally related. That there was a subject matter of inquiry defined by all these. You see, the fantastic thing is that in 1856, before the publication of The Origin of Species, Wallace in Ternate, Indonesia, had a psychedelic spell following his malaria in which he invented the principle of natural selection. He wrote to Darwin and he said, look, natural selection is just like a steam engine with a governor, the first cybernetic model. But then he only thought he had an illustration. He didn't think he'd really said probably the most powerful thing that had been said in the 19th century. Mead, only nobody knew it. Back to Bateson, nobody knew it, and there it is still in the text. Nobody picked it up. Well, there was the machinery, the governor itself. There was the mathematics of the machine with the governor, which was done by Clerk Maxwell in 1868, because nobody knew how to write a blueprint for these bloody things. They would go into oscillation. Then there's Claude Bernard about 1890 with the milieu interne, the internal matrix of the body, control of temperature, control of sugar, and all that. Stuart Brand, which later became homeostasis. Back to Bateson, which later became homeostasis in canon. But nobody put the stuff together to say these are the formal relations which go for natural selection, which go for internal physiology, which go for purpose, which go for a cat trying to catch a mouse, which go for me picking up the salt cellar. This was really done by Weiner and Rosenbluth and McCullough and Bigelow. And who really put the truth through? I don't know, do you? And that's the end of the passage from that interview. While the hilariousness of natural selection supposedly emerging from a psychedelic spell cannot be understated, and that really is hilarious. I mean, especially just knowing the whole backstory of natural selection and, you know, the Royal Society and that following that strain all the way through the Fabians and to where we are now. That's hilarious. But oh, and I heard an anecdote, and again, this is from Terence McKenna, that Wallace, they kind of had discovered the same thing at the same time, and he was saying how they just put him, when they were releasing the paper, they put they held some sort of like banquet at the university, and they had Darwin speak first, and then they put Wallace like way at the end of the thing when no one would listen, would remember him. I didn't do justice to that story, but it was something to that effect. So while the hilariousness of natural selection supposedly emerging from a psychedelic spell cannot be understated, the genius of creating natural selection as a cybernetic model for human evolution was that it annihilated the idea of any sort of external influence behind the development of, quote unquote, our system of civilization. In other words, survival of the fittest amounted to the equivalent of an alibi for the intelligence orchestrating our perception of this reality, such that in our hypnotized state, we actually look at society and blame ourselves for the depraved results of our quote unquote natural evolution. And, just when I was reading that, it made me think of the example I gave earlier about, the traffic jam, right? Where you're blaming the other person on the road instead of the people that created the system of roads in the first place and made them hopelessly inefficient and just with terrible design. Getting more serious with this series of sentences. The disgusting irony here is that while the implementation of this intelligence's system necessarily inhibits the otherwise natural ability of our individual bodies to achieve perfect health and resonate in symbiosis with the earth, civilization's systemic apotheosis, known as the New World Order, is actually modeled after a human body with perfected homeostatic function, i.e. a self-regulating mechanized feedback loop of sustainability. And that really is crazy, right? The idea that this system has so turned things upside down that while we have a naturally designed ability to achieve perfect health, our health is sacrificed into the system, which then uses the model of our body to achieve its own perfection. Like, that's totally insane, man. Planet Earth is fucking crazy. Like, where are we? This is madness. Anyway, moving on. A precursor to cybernetics and systems theory, physiologically speaking, the concept of homeostasis attempts to structuralize the naturally existing internal stability of living beings, meaning categorization of the body's perceived ability, tendency, or process of maintaining a steady state equilibrium when regulating its internal environment in relation to external stimuli. According to this philosophy, living systems like the human body have permeable boundaries and engage in constant dynamic exchanges with the environment. Cannon's homeostasis is nuanced in the sense that maintaining the steady state is not actually a state of true physical, chemical, or energetic equilibrium. Of course not, in parentheses, because by design, it is not possible for the body to reach this state when participating in society, which is kind of what I was just editorializing there. Rather, the body is maintained dynamically in a non-equilibrium state within set parameters or ranges. For example, while a body performing as designed is engaged in a far more complex version of maintaining dynamic equilibrium with its environment, a thermostat attempts to achieve a steady state in temperature by regulating the operation of heating and cooling systems in response to feedback above or below a set temperature range. The body engages in a similar process while maintaining its internal temperature at 98.6 degrees, or so the analogy goes. In this analogy, the system of civilization is a thermostat thousands of years in the making, an attempt to create a mechanized replication of the perfectly self-regulating equilibrium observed in living systems and the natural world in general. In this context, we can see how the current sustainability narrative is designed to consolidate this intelligence's artificial ecological system into a more efficient homeostatic equilibrium or steady state. The vision for this system's homeostatic equilibrium is a fully automated cyber-physical feedback mechanism regulating the artificial ecosystem of society in sustainable balance with a tightly controlled supply of system resources. And so now we have two quotes from Snowpiercer. The first one is from Wilford. I've devoted my entire life to this, the internal engine. It is eternity itself. And the next one is from the Mason character. I'm sure that choice of name was accidental. Eternal order is prescribed by the sacred engine. All things flow from the sacred engine. One aspect of the foundation underlying the creation of this system's cyber-physical feedback mechanism has been innocently labeled as the Internet of Things, a term referring to the exchange of data between a network of physical objects embedded with electronics, software, sensors, and internet connectivity. These smart cyber-physical devices will form the basis of the smart home, the smart grid, and the smart megacity, thus facilitating an automated worldwide feedback loop of information which this intelligence can use to eventually perfect homeostatic dynamic equilibrium within its artificial ecosystem. The rub for humanity, of course, is that this intelligence views the beings participating in its system as individual units which likewise need to be merged with the cyber-physical network. Hence the boiling waters of the digital economy known as smartphones, wearable technologies, cashless societies, DARPA bitcoins, blockchains, biometric identifications, RFID chips, micro apartments, renewable energies, driverless vehicles, and carbon footprints. And obviously, that list could go on and on and on. But I think it's important, if you didn't know, DARPA's involvement in Bitcoin and the blockchain, it's like the internet, right? Like, the internet did not come out of nowhere, and it is, well, that this really encapsulates the whole purpose of it, because while you are on it, and this goes back to the medium is the message video that I stumbled through, and I'm really kind of embarrassed by because I'm all over the place and just when I read my writing, I'm like, oh, okay, this is making sense, and then I listen back to me talk without like that structure, and it's like, oh man. which is, and of course that whole thing's ironic because I'm reading the written word that I'm saying, theoretically divorced us from our natural state of being. Well, one of the many things in that process that transpired over the centuries. But this is what I speak. I don't know how else to go about it other than just recognizing that inherent hypocrisy to what you're saying, just as a way to like ground the argument you're making. Um, so then below that, I just posted a snippet from a news article that was, the headline was, "Say goodbye to your ATM card, Chase to introduce new machines that only need an app to withdraw cash." And it says again to this point of artificial evolution. It says the linking of ATMs to mobile phones has become a quote unquote natural next step for transferring money and split bills when cash isn't available. So this trend is coming. It's going to be here soon. The smartphones will be the new payment systems. You won't have credit cards anymore. You won't have anything. Obviously, cash will be gone, and you'll be using. Now, of course, it's hard for people to imagine this because you want to believe that it's going to be this huge event, right? Like they're just going to come out and, Prince William's going to come out and say, well, all cash is banished. We're done with cash. And it's like, no, dude, these guys, they operate in decades. There'll be a black market that still uses cash. And saying a black market's even wrong, like, or not accurate. There'll be people that hold on to that tradition and they'll just be phased out, because it's a generational thing. It'll be mostly the baby boomer generation that'll still use cash as they, and as they die off. I mean, God, it sucks to say that, like die off, but as they exit this plane, the younger generations, especially the ones that are like, 15, 16 right now, they're going to be totally rewired with the digital synapse to the point where, they'll have no problem adjusting to the smartphone running their existence. And I mean, that's already, it's not just the digital currencies and, that the digital banking that'll start that. It's also medicine, like that's really how they got this whole thing out there is they started it with the benefits that your smartphone could track. You take a pill that's got an RFID chip and your smartphone can track it, and it can give you updates on your status and be your little pal, right? It's insanity, and so that's why I put that picture of Contact when she goes through the wormhole, right? And because it's they come to her in that form that she'll identify with, which was her father, and they tell her small moves, Ellie, small moves, and it's like, yeah, that's how they do it. It's and moreover, the kind of like esoteric idea of we're making contact with this digital synapse, and they're doing it slowly by slowly, small moves over time. And then the last picture is just of these huge data farms that are coming into being, and how that is forming the basis of the smart grid. It's wild, man. If you do some research into these data farms, like they're ecosystems, man, it's crazy. But moving on. In this connection, we can see the brilliance of the man-made climate change myth insofar as it drives the willing adoption of these quote-unquote solutions, such as a carbon regulation scheme that actually turns the air of the artificial ecosystem into a cyber-physical object which can be quantified and traded as informational currency. Say hello to subprime carbon. By the time a significant portion of the population realizes that oil is abiotic and peak oil is a lie, this intelligence will have already locked us into a cyber-physical grid of renewable energy and sustainable development via international law purporting to save the environment from man-made climate change. Like the role of America as the new Atlantis, the oil industry will play the contrived role of scapegoat here. Big oil braced for global warming while it fought regulations. And yeah, so like the contrived role is a link to James Corbett, who, he appeals to a certain demographic that's not quite Alex Jones, but he's doing the same thing that Alex Jones does, right? He's disseminating the propaganda that needs to be disseminated. He's just doing it to a more unemotional, rational demographic. Meanwhile, intelligence front groups have already started positioning the existing corporate machinery to artificially control the distribution of resources within the new sustainability economy. And then this is a link. Rockefeller's heirs to an oil fortune will divest charity of fossil fuels. And incidentally, using the same tactic, the controlled exposure of the Federal Reserve is paving the way for IMF/BRIC international regulatory reform of the dollar reserve system. And then I mean that just makes it's obvious what they're doing. Like it's gonna the sustainability economy. This is what this is what the left did with Solandra and solar power in general. Like they purposely held back its development so that an infrastructure. It's like what they're doing with marijuana now too. They hold back the infrastructure until their agents can establish it themselves. Then they allow the actual business of end of it to come to fruition, because they will control the resources by controlling the underlying infrastructure that starts the whole thing, right? And that's what they're doing with the sustainability economy and renewable energies, and they're doing the same thing with marijuana too. I mean, legalizing it in the states that they are. I mean, if you look into all the companies that are involved, it's big business, man. It's not some grassroots movement. And whether or not you smoke marijuana or not, like you got to understand, which I would tell you not to, but well, I wouldn't tell you not to. Like you're your own person, make up your own mind. I can only speak from my own experience where I used to smoke a ton of marijuana when I was younger, like in my 20s, but I mean, it's been years since I have, and my mind is, along with all the other changes that I've made, my mind is sharper than ever, and that's the only motivation I could give you to maybe consider doing that. Is you'll take your research to the next level, and in your ability to perceive. So, let me, I that makes me feel all sorts of grime when I get like a little preachy like that. Ugh. You do whatever you want, okay? I'm not going to tell you how to live your life. That's for sure. Likewise, hiding behind a propaganda cloak of providing clean water, similar intelligence front groups have also been buying up water rights across the world for many years now. And some might even go so far as to speculate that the Cloud Trail weather manipulation program will be used to create artificial drought conditions in certain areas of the world in order to both control population density distributions via forced migration and further spawn the creation of a fully privatized world water market. Straight out of a Hollywood horror script, Citigroup economist William Boyder, I don't know how to pronounce his name, William Boyder expects a world integrated derivatives market for fresh water to develop within 25 to 30 years that will eventually dwarf the market for oil and all other commodities, specifically stating that there will be different grades and types of fresh water, just the way we have light, sweet, and heavy sour crude oil today. Yeah, and that's just a crazy, crazy statement. Man. And I mean, they're kind of, look at what they're doing in Flint, Michigan, man. Like, it's public water supplies all over the place. And then there's the story that comes out that the one I don't remember if it was a city organization or a state or a federal, but they had been drinking bottled water for like a year before that came out. And I mean, they're purposely destroying the public water supplies and contaminating them so that this bottled water racket can be further extended. I mean, Nestle's in there sucking out the Great Lakes to fuel their industry, and then if you throw in, the weather manipulation and the drought, like that totally artificial drought in California, so that they could pass all those laws that are Agenda 21 friendly. It's just wild, man. Like it's quite a scam. What a scam. And then below this, I have a picture of my third grade yearbook, which was, and it's amazing. it says "Save Our Earth" on the front, and then inside there's like a crossword puzzle about environmentalism. So yeah, I was born in 1982, and my generation, we got hit. We got really hit with this propaganda. And so you have to just have a little empathy for the younger generation, like especially all these kids that are supporting Bernie Sanders right now. He's appealing to that, you know. He's appealing to that sentiment that's been indoctrinated into these younger generations who have an intuitive sense that we should be stewards of the earth. So they, the narrative used by Bernie Sanders is very appealing to them. Like, oh, we got to get rid of these evil, 1% businessmen who are destroying the earth, And of course, Bernie Sanders is no different than Donald Trump or any of the other politicians. I mean, first of all, they're actors. Second of all, their platforms are absolutely ridiculous because they don't address the larger issue of artificial scarcity, which this post is about to get into. So moving down, there's just a picture of contrails that I took that are just, totally obvious. And then a picture of the white sun, which is another subject that no one talks about. No one talks about the fact that our sun is apparently going supernova. Like every day I walk outside and I look up at the sun and I'm like, I can't even believe. It's like, where am I? What is going on? It's crazy, man. And no one talks about it. No one. Especially in the alternative media. But you can find endless debates over the shape of the earth and even which way the sun's setting and what that means for the shape of the earth. But let's not talk about the fact that it's blinding. Just totally blinding. Just a little anecdote on that note. I was walking in this nature area that I go to, like the state park. I was on the trail, and there was a clearing in the trees, and I had to do a double take because I thought that the underbrush and bushes were covered in snow at first. And then I was like, oh, that's not snow. That's just the leaves reflecting this blinding white light of the sun. I'm going to get into this maybe in another video because I think it should stand alone for discussion and just for people like searching for it. Because I know there's people out there, so, like, you can find forum posts about it, but you just can't find anybody of any like reputation, quote unquote, that's discussing it. But yeah, just crazy stuff. Which is why I start this next paragraph here. Presumably knowing that the sun would shift its resonant frequency before its cyber-physical grid was fully established, this intelligence must have been aware that it would need to develop a way to channel the energetically intuitive connection to creation that would arise within the early 21st century generations. So while there are some truly horrific things being done to the Earth's habitat which should be stopped immediately, for example, mountaintop coal removal, where the tops of mountains are literally blown off with explosives. And I mean, you could add any number of things to that. Mountaintop coal removal is truly ridiculous. Like there'll be like sludge banks that are created as a result of that break, and they go into rivers. And even not too long ago, I think the Colorado River turned just straight up orange from a chemical leak. And sorry, it happens. Like, I'm not trying to minimize the totally ridiculous things that are going on with polluting the environment, but just trying to separate it from this garbage man-made climate change narrative. So the man-made climate change and corresponding sustainable development narratives are not designed to address these issues. Rather, like all the rest of this intelligence's propaganda, these narratives are designed to siphon intuitive knowing via contrived marketing, using such talking points to shoehorn in a regulatory framework, which serves the creation of the artificial cyber-physical ecosystem. A machine without the capability to consider its impact on the real environment, let alone the living beings turning its gears. Much to the dismay of all the blossoming environmental stewards out there, if you support these agendas, you necessarily support the further development of a machine which by its very design is meant to further disconnect you from the environment you are striving to protect. On the flip side of the spectrum, if you want to hear what a whitewashed expose sounds like, look no further than the way disinformation agents Chris Kendall and John Adams mix the truth with obfuscation in their analysis of these issues. And of course, Chris Kendall and John Adams are a part of the larger disinformation network, quote unquote, media fakery, where everyone gets their PhD in video analysis from Simon Schach University. But Chris Kendall and John Adams, they're more on they're basically rebranding Alan Watt, where it's like master of the lower mysteries type of stuff, where they're just going to run you in circles talking about, how all of this was actually written in the books by the, people like the Huxleys and Bertrand Russell and that whole, the whole strain that is Frankfurt School, Fabian Society, Royal Society, Cecil Rhodes, that whole narrative. They take that and then they merge it with the ideas of media fakery, and you can see that with like Jay Dyer, who is, he's on a weekly show with Patrick Henningsen from 21st Century Wire, who's a former InfoWars correspondent. He's on Mike Adams' talk network, but yet he brings apparently very intelligent analysis of philosophy, right? But that they're just keeping you in those lower realms, right? And again, going back to James Corbett, it's appealing to that mentality that's more science rational, science like rationality based. That's kind of like the demographic they're going to. And of course, I can't get into all the permutations of this, and nor do I want to. And look, I don't have anything against any of these people, like, other than the fact that they're obfuscating the truth and preventing you from, reaching your full potential, because you don't know what any of these people had to go through. Like, they could have been indoctrinated from a very early age for the role that they were going to play, and there could have been any number of things that happened to get them to where they're at. And so, hating them isn't going to help anything. I don't hate these people. Like, I want them to come to our side, man. And if you go around every time that you figure out that somebody is a disinformation agent and you're like, raining the fire of hell down on them, like, they're just going to hate you more. They're going to become more prone to engage in the activities they're engaging in. Like, especially when you are just so easily swayed emotionally by what they put out. But anyway, moving on. So now we have a quote from Ted Turner. Our children can inherit a legacy of wastefulness or an action plan that can save our planet. That is why we created Captain Planet and the Planeteers. We need a superhero for Earth. I thought it was just amazing that Ted Turner actually created Captain Planet. I watched that fucking cartoon when I was younger, man. And I have no doubt that that's where some of my, like, environmental programming has come from, Like, and especially if you go and watch the first episode of Captain Planet, it's kind of hilarious. It's like the Gaia hypothesis. It's like a Joseph Campbell book distilled into one... It's distilled into one scene in a cartoon. It's like Joseph Campbell and John Lash in cartoon form, combined with this fake environmental movement. Okay, not only was intelligence frontman Ted Turner behind the Captain Planet cartoon, but he is also on record calling for a 95% reduction in world population. Like man-made climate change, the concept of overpopulation is a brilliant myth in the sense that the steady state balance of civilization's artificial ecosystem would be threatened if the cyber-physical network became overcrowded relative to its artificially limited supply of resources. So notice the distinction that while the natural environment of the Earth is clearly not overpopulated, the interlocking megacity design of this intelligence's ultimate wisdom, now that, you can't tell me that's a Freudian slip, because I don't think this is wisdom. Let me start over. So notice the distinction that while the natural environment of the Earth is clearly not overpopulated, the interlocking megacity design of this intelligence's ultimate vision for its artificial ecosystem could indeed become overcrowded relative to its purposely limited resources. That being said, given the modus operandi of that which orchestrates our perception of this reality, the following seems much more likely. The overpopulation myth is propaganda designed to psychologically imprint the minds of those experiencing the current subphase of the artificial ecosystem's development, wherein currently existing urban infrastructures do not support the number of people being forced to move to major cities due to contrived economic depression. Hence, such overcrowding will be perceived as overpopulation, helping stimulate the energetic groundswell required to adopt the cyber-physical infrastructure of the smart megacity and the larger UN environmental propaganda apparatus in general. Just reading this, like sometimes I think I do a little bit too long of sentences. I should go in and put some commas into some of these. That was a little, I'm even out of breath reading myself sometimes, man. Whew. Moreover, a vision designed to create mega region digital cities via the forced disintegration of rural communities explains why pretty much every dystopian science fiction ever created includes some version of the disingenuous narrative where a group of savages live in squalor outside of the great technologically advanced city walls. And below we have, and just going back to that, like, you can see that subtly in all of like the transhumanist inspired rhetoric, where it's like you're somehow resisting progress if you are pointing out the insanity of this whole thing. And that's seen in well, they call you a Luddite, right? Oh, you're just some Luddite, you're anti-technology. It's like, it's not, I'm anti that this technology is rewiring my brain. That's what I'm anti. I don't even care about all that Oculus virtual reality garbage. I'm talking about what's happening in real time while I'm viewing this stuff. Anyway, below the next is a quote from Snowpiercer, and this is Wilford. Curtis, dear boy, the fact is that we are all stuck inside this blasted train. We are all prisoners in this hunk of metal. And this train is a closed ecosystem. We must always strive for balance. Air, water, food supply, and the population must always be kept in balance. For optimum balance, however, there have been times when more radical solutions were required, when the population needed to be reduced rather drastically. We don't have time for true natural selection. We would all be hideously overcrowded and starved waiting for that. The next best solution is to have individual units kill off other individual units. I believe it is easier for someone to survive on this train if they have some level of insanity. I mean, as Gilliam well understood, we need to maintain a proper balance of anxiety and fear, chaos and horror in order to keep life going. And if we don't have that, we need to invent it. And this is from the character Mason. Oh, enough is not the criterion. Balance. You see, this aquarium is a closed ecological system, and the number of individual units must be closely, precisely controlled in order to maintain the proper, sustainable balance. And of course, this is a metaphor for the artificial ecological system that is society and civilization. And it's, well, let me just read this. Again, it's a picture of the Georgia Guidestones and the commandment that states, maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. And I say this is the projected population equilibrium for cyber-physical homeostasis within the artificial ecosystem. While in the past, this intelligence would generally maintain sustainable population levels in its ecosystem by tricking the quote-unquote useless eaters into charging at each other on a stationary battlefield, the creation of the cyber-physical grid required the infusion of information technology into the military-industrial complex, eventually presenting a bit of a conundrum. First, the war machine would become too efficient, no longer supporting mass casualty battlefield warfare. And second, established nation states going to war with each other would contradict the narrative being crafted for international cooperation at the UN level. As disgusting as it is to be forced to discuss the loss of human life so flippantly, the largest post-World War II war took place in the jungles of Vietnam simply because the country was an afterthought at the UN level and guerrilla warfare still produced mass casualties. Likewise, regarding the choice of the mountains of Afghanistan for the post-9/11 war on terror, i.e. the terrain negates some of the technological efficiency of the war machine, encouraging more casualties. Shifting the narrative to autonomous, albeit imaginary, homegrown terrorists also cleverly provided the UN nation states with a common enemy to unite and legislate against. And I mean, of course, you have the Patriot Act and everything that came after that. And they even did it back to Tim McVeigh, right? Because that was, and Waco, like they started this merger of homegrown domestic terrorists who are, ultra right, white nationalist types, merging that with criticism of the system itself. They did the same thing with Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, as well, which I'll get into. There's a quote from him at the end of the post. Not surprisingly, the apotheosis of the allopathic medical system coincided with the phasing out of the traditional war machine. And all joking aside, this is really disgusting, like this paragraph. If you would like to see 21st century battlefields, simply take a trip to your local armada of oncology offices, wherein every year millions of people are compassionately nursed to their deaths with the best modern biotechnology that science has to offer. And that truly is just, I mean, talk about blood sacrifices, man. Like, we got this going on every day. And meanwhile, all the charities are giving $250,000, $500,000 salaries to the CEOs. They're looking for a cure, but they're never going to find one. It's just, and of course, cancer itself is not some virus. It's a condition that arises in your body due to toxicity. And so you can say that they are intentionally causing this to happen by polluting our environment and everything that we touch with toxic chemicals. It's a coordinated effort to destroy us. I mean, there's no, and not in some like depopulation event, just to destroy our connection to life, to the earth, to the bioresonance that we are designed to have, where you're flowing with creation, man. Like, that is what I'm about. That is what everything that I'm doing is about, getting back to, because you feel alive when you get back to that. Given that the true population levels on the planet are probably much closer to 500 million than we are led to believe, achieving the cyber-physical system's desired homeostatic population equilibrium by the end of the 21st century is not likely to include the traditional concept of World War III or any sort of the mass depopulation event so often discussed by the charlatans of the alternative media when referencing the Georgia Guidestones. Modern warfare is psych-biological, an especially obvious fact considering the proliferation of endocrine disruptors and this intelligence's conveniently blossoming androgynous LGBT narrative, a necessary subphase in the development of the digital synapse. And by the way, I just saw a news article that the second Wachowski brother is now a transgender individual. So they're both transgenders. I mean, give me a break. Like, the two creators of The Matrix are now transgender. Well, they didn't create it, of course. That was coming from, they're just the front men. I suppose I can't call them the front man anymore. Oh, shit. They are the front transgendered. This place is crazy. This reality is insane. Man. Whew. Okay. Sorry. Moving on. Alchemically combining biological warfare with public relations produces a very effective hypnotic potion, whereby systemic change is easily achieved via perceptual realignments of the beings interacting with society, such as the American societal realignment accompanying the sex, drugs, and rock and roll 60s counterculture, which later included the introduction of feminist ideology and its trusted companions, no-fault divorce, and the feminine hormone destroyer known as birth control. And man, if you go look at the history of no-fault divorce, like, there's a good documentary out there on it, and it was a contrived thing that created a whole huge legal business. And not only that, more importantly, it further wedged the state into the lives of the children of these families that are getting divorced. I mean, if you are looking for evidence of a eugenics program, it is right there in the name birth control itself, i.e. controlling births. In the abstract to their paper entitled The Economic Consequences of Reproductive Health and Family Planning, the authors had the following to say about the magnanimous effort to spread the wisdom of this intelligence's system of sexual perversion across the world in order to save the planet. And as an added bonus, this will also expand the genetic pool of aborted fetuses available for stem cell research, as well as the stock of anti-aging fetus smoothies. And like, athletes use this sort of stem cell research to heal faster from there's stories of American athletes having to go to Europe to get these treatments. I think Kobe Bryant was one of them. And, they use, it's a little, I know there's a lot of people that talk about Pepsi and how they're using aborted fetus cells to do their tasting. Like, they are using that cell to experiment with, but it's not like they're taking the actual fetus itself, and putting it in a fucking can of Pepsi. Like, it's still disgusting and wrong, obviously, but like, just for a little clarification there. So this is a quote from just, I don't know, two insane people, we'll say. I'm losing my momentum to call them, to refer to them in any sort of legitimate way. So we consider the evidence for the effect of access to reproductive health services on the achievement of UN Millennium Development Goals 1, 2, and 3, which aim to eradicate extreme poverty and hunger, achieve universal primary education, and promote gender equality and empower women. At the household level, controlled trials in Bangladesh and Ghana have shown that increasing access to family planning services reduces fertility and improves birth spacing. In the Bangladesh study, findings from long-term follow-up showed that women's earnings, assets, and body mass indexes and children's schooling and body mass indexes substantially improved in areas with improved access to family planning services compared with outcomes in control areas. At the macroeconomic level, reductions in fertility enhance economic growth as a result of reduced youth dependency and an increased number of women participating in paid labor. Backtracking a bit and speaking of realigning perceptions, in order to establish the beginnings of a social class hierarchy, this intelligence was forced to concoct the truth that resources are finite. The Earth's resources are essentially infinite for those that interact with it as designed. So just like the aforementioned overpopulation myth, insofar as this assumption is actually true for those that have been tricked into perceiving this system as the natural evolutionary outgrowth of humanity and creation itself, one can see how wickedly clever of an advertising campaign it was to claim that resources are finite in the context of a syndicate of monopoly cartels and media aggregators which operate under the guise of the quote-unquote free market to manipulate the supply and demand for all resources. Indeed, this manipulation permeates every aspect of the artificial ecosystem, from the perceived value of a diamond rock to the repeated cycle of economic recession/depression triggered via manipulation of the money supply. And is there any more evidence of the cartel-like nature of resource scarcity than diamonds, which through what can only be described as brilliant marketing, they tied this to the ridiculous ritual of marriage where the state sanctions your love and locks you into a contract that allows them to, as I just was saying about no-fault divorce, to intervene in your own private life because you both signed the contract. But yeah, like the diamonds are just plentiful. There's nothing scarce about them, but through the marketing and hoarding of the resources or the supply of diamonds themselves, they charge you outrageous amounts of money for them. What a racket. Oh man, what a racket. Good work if you can get it. And, I put the diamond example here so that, it's a microcosm of the macrocosm that we'll be getting into. Put another way, the birth pangs of this system's vision for homeostatic equilibrium were initiated through the ploy of making resources artificially scarce, the fundamental impact of which was twofold. First, the beings using the system were forced to compete amongst each other for those scarce resources, the predictably horrific results of which form the basis of current UN rhetoric regarding the naturally occurring problems of the 21st century, and that's quote unquote naturally occurring. And second, the perceived existence of resource scarcity necessarily requires limits to growth, hence the contrived narrative that came out of the Club of Rome in 1972. Accordingly, it should make perfectly logical sense why The Limits to Growth was published by an international team of professors and researchers at MIT using the system dynamics methodology of J. Forrester. Industrial dynamics was the first major application of systems theory to corporations, making Forrester's analysis the logical framework within which to streamline the corporate regulatory structure of the subsidiary corporate entities, nation states, which comprise the artificial ecosystem. While the intelligence orchestrating our perception of this reality has always been using a form of cybernetics systems theory to domesticate humanity, any conventional examination of the history of cybernetics will place its origins at the Macy conferences held in New York City. The Macy conferences were preceded by the Cerebral Inhibition meeting in 1942, a meeting which Bateson and Mead described in their previously mentioned interview with Stuart Brand. This is Stuart Brand. I need a little background, if it's all right, on how this whole Macy thing got rolling, why and when and what the sequence was. Bateson. There was this Macy meeting in what, 42? Stuart Brand. Who started it and what was it about? Bateson. This was a meeting called Cerebral Inhibition, which in fact was a meeting on hypnosis. Cerebral inhibition was a respectable word for hypnosis. Most of what was said about feedback was said over lunch. Mead. Well, I know that's what you always tell people, but I didn't sit at the same place at lunch, and I heard what was said at that conference. But at that conference, which is the one where Milton Erickson hypnotized that Yale psychologist, it was at the end of that conference that you really had the design of what needed to be done. And then you were caught up in war work and went overseas, and there was that long period. Allegedly known among its members as the Man-Machine Project, given everything discussed thus far, it is only fitting that the scriptwriters would dubiously trace the roots of cybernetics to the study of mass hypnotism. While its definitions are just as contrived as its history, Ernst von Glasersfeld openly referred to cybernetics as the art of creating equilibrium in a world of constraints and possibilities. And of course, that is a world of artificial constraints and possibilities, right? That is the art of creating that equilibrium in artificially constrained situations. Intelligence frontmen Arturo Rosenbluth, Norbert Weiner, and Gillian Bigelow first outlined the conceptual teleology for cybernetics based on the perceived similarities between the goal-directed design of machines and organisms, invoking an analysis of circular causality, whereby new behaviors were influenced by feedback from immediately preceding behaviors, or feedback loops. And feedback loops, in this context, they sound complicated, but it's not. I mean, you're engaged in a real-time feedback loop right now just listening to my voice. Everything that I say is conceptually feeding back into your brain. You're processing it, and your behavior is not adjusting to it now, but your processing behavior is adjusting to it, if that makes sense. Negative feedback refers to some function of the output of a system, process, or mechanism being fed back in a manner that tends to reduce fluctuations in output, whether caused by changes in the input or by other disturbances. Whereas positive feedback tends to lead to instability via exponential growth, oscillation, or chaotic behavior, negative feedback tends to reduce the effects of perturbations, generally promoting stability and equilibrium. Like the thermostat analogy, the more mathematically and computer-oriented Weiner and John von Neumann supposed that the human brain was a complex input-output machine such that human behavior could in effect be programmed on both an individual and societal scale. And, I don't think we can say that they're wrong. Because that's essentially what they've done through this hypnotic feedback mechanism that is the media. And, it's slowly progressing in its ability to hypnotize, because we've moved from the written media and the radio to this visual media that is even more effective at hypnotism, because it's, there are so many more images being processed by your subconscious mind that your conscious mind can't even perceive. as opposed to just like you might be exposed in some print medium to like some subliminal advertising, but there's not that refresh rate issue. Moving on. Definitions and pleasantries aside, the central premise behind cybernetics is the controlled manipulation of negative feedback loops in order to influence the behavior of the beings participating in the artificial ecosystem known as civilization, a methodology ultimately designed to produce a self-regulating feedback loop of mechanized sustainability within the collective subconscious. Or put more simply, as applied to the human mind, cybernetics is scientific gibberish designed to intellectually rationalize the perfection of mass hypnosis. By contrast, the public relations spin for the Macy meetings stated that they were designed to promote meaningful communication across scientific disciplines, attempting to restore unity to science. The subtext behind the scenes was naturally much different, starting with the fact that the Josiah Macy Jr. Foundation was the philanthropic arm of the Macy's department store and Long Island oil company Fortune, the latter of which eventually became a subsidiary of Rockefeller's Standard Oil. The meetings were cleverly designed to provide historical academic cover for the intelligence front of engineers, anthropologists, neurologists, biologists, and psychologists tasked with ideologically transforming Western society in preparation for the developing post-World War II international cyber-physical ecosystem. Further connections among this crowd are widely known and available for those inclined to seek them out. So suffice it here to say that links to the OSS, CIA, MKUltra, Frankfurt School, Tavistock Institute, and the Vienna Circle are all fully represented by this collection of esteemed academics. Incidentally, the younger brother of Austrian economics charlatan and alternative libertarian media darling Ludwig von Mises also belonged to the Vienna Circle. And of course, another note, Rockefeller funded the actual Ludwig von Mises when he came to America. I mean, I could go on for days about this libertarian, the Ron Paul, Lou Rockwell, von Mises, Rothbard, Volcker Fund, Hoover Institution, Mont Pelerin Society, Council for National Policy, going all the way back to all of these minds that came out of Vienna. That's why it's called the Austrian School of Economics. Freud came from Vienna. I'm not going to do that now. I might do that in the future because you can tie the entire alternative financial media into this. That being said, a brief digression is in order for my personal favorite example of these dubious connections. This particular one surrounding the weaponization of Freud and Jung's fraudulent psychology and mental health in general. The first Director General of the World Health Organization was Dr. George Brock Chisholm, who for some inexplicable reason was a psychiatrist by trade and not a real doctor, though I suspect it had something to do with him saying the following: "To achieve world government, it is necessary to remove from the minds of men their individualism, loyalty to family tradition, national patriotism, and religious dogmas." Anyways, as head of the WHO, Dr. Chisholm suggested that the World Federation of Mental Health be created. Dr. Chisholm's close friend and founder of the Tavistock Clinic, John Rawlings Rees, resigned from his position at Tavistock to organize the Third International Congress of Mental Hygiene, which would soon thereafter change its name to the WFMH, or World Federation of Mental Health. While Chisholm and Rees were the architects, they tapped Margaret Mead and Lawrence Frank to author the WFMH. And now, of course, Margaret Mead we've already gone over. Lawrence Frank was also one of the initial contributors to the cybernetics movement and the Macy conferences. To author the WFMH founding statement, wherein Mead Frank wrote, "The goal of mental health has been enlarged from the concern for the development of healthy personalities to the larger task of creating a healthy society." Considered the godfather of the American child development field, Lawrence Frank even went so far as to propose a new religion of mental health. And he proposed it, but they created it. I mean, there is a religion of mental health out there right now, and it's ridiculous. Psychiatry, there is no, it's totally based on a man or woman who goes to a school that indoctrinates them into these theories of mental health. just judging whether or not somebody is bipolar, for example, and then they prescribe them these pills that are mind destroyers, soul destroyers, and it's like a $70 billion a year business. I mean, it might even be more than that by now. It's a racket, man. Psychiatry is a joke. And if I do, oh man, whew, gets me a little riled up. Deep breath. Those psychiatrists, man, they're frauds. Okay, where was I? John Rawlings Rees referred to those involved in the new mental health organization as psychiatric shock troops, who would be at the heart of a worldwide social engineering apparatus. The first WFMH treasurer was Frank Fremont Smith, medical director of the Macy Foundation, who later organized the first ever conferences on LSD under the same umbrella. In fact, the sixth Cybernetics conference was even attended by Dr. Harold Abramson, one of the CIA's chief scientists experimenting with LSD. This is the point where we ask two questions. One, why did members of the quote-unquote man-machine project on cybernetics, with origins in mass hypnosis, have anything whatsoever to do with the so-called advancements in mental health and child development? And two, given the above, why would anyone believe a single diagnosis or take any of the quote-unquote prescription medicine that comes out of the modern fields of psychology and psychiatry? And this is a quote from Bertrand Russell. Although this science will be diligently studied, it will be rigidly confined to the governing class. The populace will not be allowed to know how its convictions were generated. When the technique has been perfected, every government that has been in charge of education for a generation will be able to control its subjects securely without the need of armies or policemen. End of quote. Bertrand Russell seems like a swell guy, let me say. Anyway. Viewed through the lens of cybernetics systems theory, the introduction of new information, events, trends into society provides negative feedback in the form of observable human behavior, programmable responses which this intelligence uses to adjust its domestication hypnosis strategies towards a more stable cyber-physical homeostatic equilibrium. Excuse me. Through the refinement of this cycle of negative feedback over time, this intelligence was able to fully assimilate human beings into its artificial ecosystem by providing a counterfeit template designed to imitate the natural intuitive resonance we would normally use to achieve equilibrium with creation, in effect disconnecting us from reality. Development of the cyber-physical smart grid is a systemic upgrade to the artificial ecosystem in the sense that the explosion of worldwide automated data will greatly increase the efficiency of this intelligence's response times to negative feedback from observable human behavior, thus fostering the development of more efficient and sustainable control mechanisms. And I mean, you can see that in all of like the CCTV, the smart lamps in the streets, the iris scanning, just everything that's going to be put in place in the smart megacities that will just be a constant loop feeding back information, right? And the artificial intelligence running the whole system will, be able to intuit patterns, and that's what they mean by a feedback loop, right? And a negative feedback loop at that, which will further enhance the ability to stabilize the system. But of course, there's no room for independent thought or straying from the Borg, as it were, in such a situation. Worse yet, adaptation to the electronic sensors and devices which this system necessitates has the potential to permanently disconnect humanity from creation. Only a form of mass hypnosis would be capable of convincing us to willingly accept such an outcome, hence the aforementioned dubious origins of cybernetics. Yeah, I mean, we're under hypnosis. There's no other way to explain it. Just going back to what I was talking about, the white sun, like, The fact that people aren't just like, now granted, before I say this, there's a certain generation that wouldn't know any better because they weren't around for the yellow sun, right? But like the overwhelming majority of society at this point, considering the baby boomer, like especially in America, the baby boomers, like it's an older generation. People should be out of their houses just like stopped looking up at the sky. I mean, never mind the chemtrails that are up there. Like they should just be stopped looking at the sun. Like you can imagine like native um, ancient cultures that have roots to that. Those they would be having celebrations, right? As soon as this sort of thing happened. I mean, that's proof right there that we're hypnotized. That people just don't even see this stuff. I mean, people should be stopped in the streets just like talking to each other about it. Like I don't think I'm going to go to work today because this is so incredible. Um, all right, moving on. So this is a quote from the architect scene from The Matrix. I am the architect. I created the Matrix. I've been waiting for you. You have many questions, and although the process has altered your consciousness, you remain irrevocably human. Ergo, some of my answers you will understand, and some of them you will not. Concordantly, while your first question may be the most pertinent, you may or may not realize it is also irrelevant. Your life is the sum of a remainder of an unbalanced equation inherent to the programming of the Matrix. You are the eventuality of an anomaly, which despite my sincerest efforts, I have been unable to eliminate from what is otherwise a harmony of mathematical precision. While it remains a burden to sedulously avoid it, it is not unexpected and thus not beyond a measure of control, which has led you inexorably here. The first Matrix I designed was quite naturally perfect. It was a work of art, flawless, sublime, a triumph equaled only by its monumental failure. The inevitability of its doom is as apparent to me now as a consequence of the imperfection inherent in every human being. Thus, I redesigned it based on your history to more accurately reflect the varying grotesqueries of your nature. And there again, you have this like going back to the beginning of the post and the quote from Agent Smith and the limits to growth. You have this projection of, this self-hate onto the human race from this intelligence that is totally ridiculous. Anyway, however, I was again frustrated by failure. I have since come to understand that the answer eluded me because it required a lesser mind, or perhaps a mind less bound by the parameters of perfection. Thus, the answer was stumbled upon by another, an intuitive program initially created to investigate certain aspects of the human psyche. If I am the father of the Matrix, she would undoubtedly be its mother. She stumbled on a solution whereby nearly 99.9% of all test subjects accepted the program as long as they were given a choice, even if they were only aware of the choice at a near unconscious level. While this answer functioned, it was obviously fundamentally flawed, thus creating the otherwise contradictory systemic anomaly that, if left unchecked, might threaten the system itself. Ergo, those that refuse the program while a minority, if unchecked, would constitute an escalating probability of disaster. And I find it very interesting in the context of artificial intelligence, cybernetics, and feedback loops that the quote-unquote intuitive program initially created to investigate certain aspects of the human psyche is the one that stumbled upon the solution whereby 99.9% of all the subjects accepted the program, right? And that's very interesting when you look at, like, say, the idea of a plan that was mathematical precision and that could be perfectly executed. And then along the way, over the centuries, there needed to be a refinement to the process. Maybe there had been failures that were unforeseen, right? So, I think the Matrix is obviously getting at things that are a lot more literal than a movie. In this context, it seems obvious that so-called coincidental historical developments are really intelligently designed hypnotic upgrades for civilization's artificial ecosystem OS, a self-sustaining narrative designed to provide its host with the perceived ability to continually choose further evolutionary progress over apparent stagnation. Viewing the previously discussed introduction of agriculture as such an upgrade, without the advent of stationary farming, it would have been impossible for this intelligence to willingly conscript scattered tribes of hunter-gatherers into the pool of slave labor needed to build out the infrastructure for the otherwise illogical concept of modern cities. Accordingly, this intelligence sold agriculture to its adopters as choosing a more convenient and stable food supply, while in reality, over the centuries, its adoption provided the leverage this intelligence needed to create the first artificially scarce distribution patterns within the food supply, and by extension, the larger societal apparatus in general, because it all starts with the food, right? As the adopters slowly lost their ability and desire to thrive in the wild. And not only did it do that, but farming leads to surplus, and a surplus has to be defended, and it puts these formerly wild hunter-gatherers who were in, relative symbiosis with the earth and resonating in the flow of creation. Now they're in this mindset of, I got to protect this surplus I have over here. And then you have this other group that maybe didn't have such a good harvest and is saying, well, I'm going to go take what you had, right? And then the whole thing starts. The insanity begins. Likewise, flash forward to the farming advances inherent to the second agricultural evolution, circa 1700, and we see a similar pattern, a trend designed to transform the nucleus of society away from the ancestral mimicry of small, tight-knit agricultural communities, moving instead in the name of progress towards the diverse, disjointed collection of beings which populate modern cities. In other words, the obvious truth is that we are only ever given the illusion of choice. And further, we are hypnotized into believing that such illusory choices represent the natural evolutionary progress of beings connected to creation. Take, for example, a logical phase in the linear execution of the quote-unquote naturally occurring rural exodus that occurred during the Second Agricultural Revolution in the form of Great Britain's version of manifest destiny known as the Enclosure Acts, acts which created legal property rights to land that was previously considered common. In effect, the Enclosure Acts allowed wealthy lords to purchase fields and push out small-scale farmers, resulting in a mass migration of workers looking for wage labor and a better life in the cities. Between 1604 and 1914, over 5,200 individual Enclosure Acts were put into place in Britain, enclosing 6.8 million acres of land. These laws were a very convenient development considering they were enacted on the heels of the Industrial Revolution, a trend which just so happened to eventually require a huge influx of new slave labor into the cities. Excuse me. Indeed, by the 1850s, only around 3% of London's population remained employed in agriculture, and its population soared to near 3 million. Politically speaking, this shift in population density allowed the cultural seeds planted by the mystic empire of the wise, religious tolerance, representative democracy, and social equality, to begin fully taking root in America and thereafter the rest of the world as its imperial vehicle spread both overtly via force and covertly via subconscious cultural manipulation into increasingly diverse cities, major cities across the world. And you can see how really the cultural seeds of the mystic empire of the wise was just the beginning of political correctness, right? Religious tolerance, representative democracy, social equality, and the political correctness movement came out of the major cities, and it spread from there into the media and till we reached the situation where we're at today, right? It was very clever, I gotta say, very clever. Excuse me. Man, I've been talking for an hour and 48 minutes straight. My voice is starting to go. Likewise, returning to the creation of the United States of America within the context of cybernetic systems theory, the contrived events of 1776 are also more lucidly viewed as intelligently designed hypnotic upgrades for civilization's artificial ecosystem OS. In addition to the signing of the aforementioned farce known as the Declaration of Independence in the same year, both Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations and James Watt's steam engine also debuted in 1776, not to mention Weishaupt's Bavarian Order. As any of this system's historians will tell you, the introduction of Watt's perfected steam engine was crucial to the process of industrialization, producing mechanized factories and steam-powered trains, both of which greatly increased the efficiency of producing and distributing goods and services across the country. Naturally, these historians leave out the part where we question whether such an outcome justified siphoning the equivalent of the Earth's blood. Moreover, as examples like the Enclosure Acts prove, this intelligence planned the agrarian-urban transition well before 1776, excuse me, so it would have likewise planned an ideological justification for this contrived development, hence the wealth of nations. Adam Smith postulated the existence of the invisible hand as a natural phenomena which guided free markets and capitalism through competition for scarce resources. Obviously, this definition is a joke, as the competition is really for artificially scarce resources, and the hand behind free market capitalism is neither invisible nor a natural phenomenon. I'm just going to take a quick break real quick. Be right back. Okay. Similar to natural selection, as a cybernetic model for the contrived evolution of humanity, the invisible hand provided an alibi for the otherwise blatant machinations of this intelligence's system of artificial scarcity and the infrastructure enforcing it. The genius of the invisible hand metaphor is that it provided intellectual and public relations cover for the legal existence of monopolies, a trend which, together with American constitutional freedom and industrialization, laid the foundation for multinational corporations, free trade agreements, and the international regulatory structure that will eventually enforce the sustainability upgrade to the cyber-physical artificial ecosystem. In this connection, the Wikipedia page for negative feedback actually cites the invisible hand metaphor as an example of the central premise behind cybernetics, where reactions to price movements provide a feedback mechanism influencing supply and demand curves. Without going too deep into the social sciences, just be advised that economics, political science, and psychology are all one and the same. Pseudosciences. Economics is a pseudoscience designed to legitimize the perceived existence of artificial scarcity. Political science is a pseudoscience designed to legitimize the theater production through which the people are provided with the illusion of an ability to change the inevitably unfair distribution of artificially scarce resources. And of course, that's what every political campaign is about, right? I mean, even I haven't listened to really any of what's been going on this time around, but like, I'm sure they're talking about, people doing their fair share, right? Like, it's always about distribution of resources. That's what political science is. And psychology is a pseudoscience designed, I should add psychiatry in there, designed to provide arbitrary reasons and toxic medication for the inevitably fucked up human psyches that will develop as a result of this unfair distribution of artificially scarce resources over multiple generations, and this affects rich and poor alike. If taken in the context of cybernetics, pseudoscience, monopolies, and artificial scarcity, by providing the illusion of choice within the free market capitalist phase of the economic system, the invisible hand metaphor functions as a microcosm of the hypnotic feedback mechanism working on the higher scale of this intelligence's system of civilization itself. The foreword to the Limits to Growth even refers to the Club of Rome as the Invisible College, a term which is also coincidentally used to refer to the prehistory of the Rosicrucians/Royal Society. While the story behind the establishment of the United States While the story behind the establishment of the United States and the American dream reads like a fairy tale that everyone wants to believe, the cold hard truth is that its existence was only designed to be a temporary subphase within the creation of the cyber-physical artificial ecosystem, a mechanized homeostatic equilibrium of human domestication thousands of years in the making. Using the illusion of freedom and democracy, the American empire successfully hypnotized the world into assimilating a singular culture, language, and banking legal system. The cyber-physical artificial ecosystem is a mathematical equation requiring deliberate restraints on growth, such that this intelligence must now dismantle the temporary power given to America in order to balance civilization's equation. Hence, by design, anti-American sentiment is at an all-time high, via controlled disclosures of its corruption. The beings which interact with the ecosystem are likewise treated as mere variables in the formula for perfected homeostatic equilibrium, dispassionately viewed as disposable numbers on a balance sheet, to be adjusted as the system's future sustainability requires. Its cleverness outdone only by its blatant disregard for human life, this intelligence cunningly deflected all inevitably calm and logical cyber-physical ecosystem analysis via association with media fabrication Ted Kaczynski, aka the Unabomber, a quote-unquote deranged Luddite and quote-unquote domestic terrorist. And this is a quote from Ted Kaczynski. It's actually the first paragraph from his manifesto, assuming that the actor playing Ted Kaczynski actually wrote this. Anyway, the Industrial Revolution and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race. They have greatly increased the life expectancy of those who live in advanced countries, but they have destabilized society, have made life unfulfilling, have subjected human beings to indignities, have led to widespread psychological suffering, in the third world to physical suffering as well, and have inflicted severe damage on the natural world. The continued development of technology will worsen the situation. It will certainly subject human beings to greater indignities and inflict greater damage on the natural world. It will probably lead to greater social disruption and psychological suffering, and it may lead to increased physical suffering even in advanced countries. And so the point of putting this here is, you can't really find anything wrong with that paragraph. He's telling the truth. But of course, they contextualize this truth with not only the persona that they gave this person as a domestic terrorist bomber, thus associating his ideas with that sort of mentality, but he also goes on to just bash the left in most of his manifesto without so they can paint it sort of as a paint it in a way that it's coming from one side of the political spectrum. You know what I'm saying? So that's the end of his quote. Moving on. Hopefully now more clear as to why I did so. As previously stated, to fight the public representatives of the New World Order is to fight ghosts in the machine, as the existence of the sacred engine of civilization supersedes the influence of any one particular intelligence asset at any given point in linear time. Moreover, the patriot approach of raging against the machine and trying to take back what was never your own in the first place only creates the chaos which this intelligence uses to further perfect the system's order. While I will never willingly assimilate into the upgraded artificial cyber-physical ecosystem, the fact remains that at this point in time, I am a fully domesticated human being, still fucked up in so many ways. That is the truth. And so I will never pretend to possess some secret sauce that will give you your freedom or peace of mind. All I can suggest is to take off your shoes, walk through the trees, and work towards restoring the body's naturally designed wild ability to infuse the awareness occupying it with true knowledge from creation itself. And now this part, there's a problem when there's a little cottage industry springing up around the idea of grounding. Like that, this should just be something that everybody does and knows intuitively. Like, this is just what we do. We walk around barefoot in the grass and we tune ourselves into the flow of creation. That's just what we do. But, given the state of just utter hypnotism and disconnection and the electromagnetic fields that we are just saturated inside of, it gets to the point where you got to buy a mat, right? Like they're selling people a mat that they can sleep on that'll help ground them that you plug into a socket, like that. It makes intuitive sense. But anyway, I digress. I'm told it's hard, right? Because I can empathize with the idea of revolution, but to me, the revolution would be what I just said, everybody regaining their natural born ability to resonate with the flow of creation. And if everyone was doing that, all of the traditional ideas of revolution would just melt away. It wouldn't be anything like that. Guns? Pfft, I don't need any guns for that sort of thing, because you assume that this would include the rank and file government workers, right? The rank and file members of the military. And so I suppose it's best to avoid the subject altogether, because that's a very like utopian philosophy, um, that something like that would happen. But when I look up at the sun, I'm like, well, if people start putting the pieces together, the energy's there to connect with in a way that hasn't been available until very recently. So I don't know, man. Let's keep that hope alive, I guess. And so here's just the last part. Of course, this is not to be confused with the walk, an audacious cinematic metaphor for 9/11, celebrating subconscious alchemy, the long con, and the art of hypnotizing a being into actually choosing to disconnect itself from that which created it. And below that, there's a picture of the last scene of the walk, where the two towers, of course, the scene is the sun, you know, rising on the towers in the morning after the walk, and the screen fading to black, right? But that's not what it is. Especially if you saw, which I don't know how you wouldn't have seen it because it went viral, Joe Alexander's video on Back to the Future and the walk. This last scene just it dots the I, right? It puts the exclamation point on the whole thing, where the towers literally turn from lead to gold, um, just symbolizing completion of the New Atlantis alchemical ritual, right? And it was going back to Back to the Future in 1985. Like, you'll find out in 30 years, and we found out in 30 years what it was all about, right? With 9/11 in the middle. It's a wild thing, crazy stuff. But I'll leave it there. This is already 2 hours, and hopefully, me reading it out will, I don't know, add a different dimension to the post. And I know there's a very small number of people that read these posts, so maybe this will appeal to a wider audience, and like I said, hopefully add something different to the people that have already read it. Thanks for listening. Have a good one.